Kyle, I think one of the things that's been on my heart, and I know it's been on yours too, because we've talked about it quite a bit, is why is the church struggling? And I say, not just Palmetto, I think churches across the nation sometimes struggle to reach the next generation. And kind of for the purposes of our talk here, we're going to define next generation as 35 and under. I know you can define that in a lot of different ways, but 35 and under, it seems like so many churches either can't keep or can't reach that age group. And we've been talking about that. Now, and I've kind of wondered, how much responsibility does the church bear for this? How much responsibility maybe do parents, and of course, when we say parent, I know we're talking about 35-year-olds, so some are no longer in the house, but how you were raised, of course, sometimes has a lot to do with how you view church and your faith and everything else. So how much responsibility does the church have? Do parents have, and maybe also the individual themselves in terms of staying with the church, of not leaving the church? And so I just wonder your thoughts on that, because I know, being in youth ministry and raising kids too. What are your thoughts on that?
I think this is an important, you talk about defining the next generation as 35 and under. And the reason I think we need to do that is because we have pretty hard numbers on a lot of studies. We'll include some links in the description below for studies that show it's skewed in the direction of 35 and under, millennial and Gen Z are responding more saying, I'm unaffiliated. I'm not, I'm one of the nuns, as Barna would refer to it. You see it in older generations, but not nearly at the rate that you do with millennial and Gen Z. Now, Gen Z has given us some hope because they seem to have a little bit of a different perspective, but there still are a growing number of people who want nothing to do with church for one reason or another. And as somebody who works with that younger generation, I always am trying to figure out, man, what role do I play as a minister? What role do I play as a leader for them in trying to help them make these kinds of connections?
You kind of feel that burden,
Most of the people who are in our church have been raised in church. Most of them. We have a lot of people in our church who have come from an unchurched situation into the situation they are now.
We have that,
But most of the kids that I work with every day have been in church since they were babies. So I recognize that they are in a little bit of a different place. And yet, I think when you start to think about family of origin, parents, their family situation, when you think about the church and you think about the individual, I think it's really a three-legged stool. I think each one of those holds equal weight. Because imagine you have really solid family life. You've really solid family life, and you have really solid church life. Well, there are just some kids who aren't going to connect with church. For whatever reason. You can have 2 or 3 kids in the same household who respond to church differently.
I mean, God's first 2 kids rebelled, so you can be the best.
True.
You can be the
That's very true. That's good news for somebody watching, I know.
Right.
Now, you could also have a golden child and a golden family, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get plugged into church. Maybe it's based on their past experiences. Maybe it's based off some bad things that they saw in the church. So there are a lot of factors that go into this. And you and I have both tried to have conversations with people in this generation, 35 and under, over the past few days to try to wrestle with, hey, what are you seeing? What are you noticing about your friends, about the people you interact with, maybe even you yourself, on why the church is struggling to reach y'all? Now, I think, once again, it's different for everybody. I think everybody's going to have a different reason. For some people, it's going to be the worship styles. For some people, it's going to be broken church leaders who make mistakes and make us lose hope for the future. For some people, it's just, man, I wasn't raised in it, so it's just not the way that I see the world. But I feel like the church has to be willing to step into hard conversations. I was having a conversation with my friend the other day about this exact thing. And I just asked, I said, hey, why do you think the church isn't doing a very good job? And he said, well, part of it is language. We often use inside baseball kind of language to talk about things, or we choose not to talk about things at all. We could have, if you look back over the past couple of years, the church has really struggled to have political conversations, to have conversations centered around race, to have conversations centered around marriage and gender. And I'm not 100% sure if it's because we don't know what we believe, Or maybe we just have a really hard time of connecting with the people who believe differently than we do. Now, I think it's really important to have opinions, to have passionate opinions and beliefs on certain things.
Yeah.
But it's equally as important to be willing to engage in conversation with people who disagree with you.
Yeah. And there's a fear there of doing that.
And I think part of that fear may be that we're not going to reach the person, or maybe they're going to try to convince us of something that we don't ourselves already believe, keeps us from being willing to engage with those people. Yeah. And in the process, they never get to hear the good news of Jesus. They never get the opportunity to come in contact with him and see how he brings more abundant life than anything else that we could come up with. So I think about all of the various things. And it's one of those moments where we can get hung up feeling like we have a lot of decision fatigue. Like, well, which one of these things? Is it worship styles? Is it engaging community groups? Is it we need to have better, deeper conversations with people? Is it we need to do this, that, or the other? And we end up doing nothing. We end up just sitting back and saying, because I don't know what to do in this moment, I'm going to do nothing. Yeah. But the problem that comes with that is the next generation sees that. Yeah. And they will find another organization. They will find another party, political party, group, another religion that does answer those questions, that is willing. This is why you have a ton of people who are not affiliated with church in any way, shape, or form. And yet they will get so hardcore plugged in on social issues. They will get so hardcore plugged in on being a part of a Peace Corps and making a difference around the world and helping people and doing good. And yet, because they didn't see the church model it well, because they didn't see Christians model it well, they decided they wanted nothing to do with it.
Yeah, everybody wants a higher purpose for their life. I mean, we're built to, in that way, being imagers of God. You know, we're built, we want a higher purpose. We're going to find it somewhere. People are going to worship. They're going to be religious, for lack of a better term, in some way in their life. Yeah. And so often they don't choose the church because they see, I was having a conversation with a couple just today, a couple under 35, just a couple I love, sweet. And I asked them, why do you think we are oftentimes losing the generation 35 and under? What do you think? And I know one of the first answers they gave me was that there's been a shift in our culture. Yeah. As we know in the past, 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, that's true.
And some of the key things that are talked about in the younger generation is acceptance. Acceptance is a word, being accepted, having safe spaces, you hear people talk about. And oftentimes young people feel like outside of the church is a place where you're accepted, where you feel safe. But they said that often in the church, they didn't feel like it was a place where people could be accepted. Wow. Where they could be just taken for who they are, but they would be judged. They felt it was a very judgmental place. And I know this is not just this generation. There have been people in the past who thought church people are judgy. That's been throughout time. Of course. But especially in this environment, when you talk about all the issues that are going on right now, some of you have already touched on, people want to know, where does the church stand? If I'm struggling with this, do I have a place to even go? Right. Are you going to hear me? Right. Are we going to talk about this? Are you just going to remain silent? Yeah. And by your silence, oftentimes they believe that means condemnation.
That's very true.
And they're not going to take silence as simply acceptance. Yeah. They want us to be talking about these things. Yeah. And I'll tell you, as a communicator, and I know you as well. Yeah. I struggle with how to talk about these things in a way that, in a Jesus way. Absolutely. That reflects his image as who we should be. Because I believe Jesus ought to guide us in how we talk to people who may think differently, look differently, act differently, who may not be, in some instances, the holy people that God calls them to be. And all of us, by the way, struggle with that. But how do we interact with them in a way that lets them know that they are loved and that, like all of us, have a ways to go?
I think the key to this whole thing is being willing to sit at a table and have conversations with people who might disagree. Yeah. And be willing to come down at different places.
Yeah, and be willing to learn. I'm 61 years old, and I would say in the past 10 years, I have learned more than I did in the previous 50. Yeah. And part of it for me has been an openness and willingness to say, okay, to look at anything I've ever believed and to say, if it is truth, I have nothing to fear. Yeah. I can be open to listening and learning and growing And until the church as a whole, we all adopt that kind of attitude. Yeah, there are times when I'm not as open as I should be. I go back sometimes to my roots of being not that way. But yeah, sit down and talk about this. I think even the couple I talked with today, just the fact of asking them that question and talking to them. These are two young people I love so much. Just asking them that, I could tell that it meant something to them to hear them out.
Right.
And to say, we need to listen to you.
That's a really good point. Because when I was talking to my students last night, a lot of what they kept coming back to when I asked them, why do you think the church isn't doing a good job of reaching this generation? They talked about how they want to have a place. Yeah. They want to have a voice. They want to know that they're heard, that they have influence. Because we tell them all the time, like, hey, you're the new church leaders. Fast forward 20 years, and this is going to be you. You're going to be in our shoes. Yeah. We need to treat them that way now. Yeah. We need to make sure that everybody knows that they do have a place there, that they do have a place to talk and to share and to be safe and to know that you're loved regardless of what decisions you make. Like, that's what church is intended to be to begin with. But some of our actions in the past have left us not doing that well. I'll say one thing you talk about over the past 10 years or so, you have done a lot of learning yourself and trying to rethink a lot of things. I'll say you're 61, I'm 28. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to try to do the math because that's hard.
It's a big age difference.
Math is crazy. But one thing that I have appreciated so much just in the year that I've been here is your willingness to learn from me. As a 28-year-old, punk kid most of the time, like, you're willing to sit down at a table with me in a podcast and have theological conversations. Yeah. We sat down for like an hour earlier recording videos and talking about, man, how can we be better ministers? How can we minister not just to the younger generation, but to the older generation, and giving me space to have an equal footing at the table. Like, that makes me know that you love me and you are willing to help me along in my path as I'm also trying to do the same thing for you. Yeah. And like, that inspires me. That makes me actually want to be a part of this team and part of this church and everything else. I think we need to do the same thing for all people 35 and under, all people in general, but especially those who are longing for that. Because it's really easy to say, hey, you're young, your time will come, like, it's okay. No, let's help them know right now.
Because see, part of it is remembering when I was 28. Part of it's remembering when I was in youth ministry, you know, when I began. By the way, you're much further advanced than I was at 28 years old. I have to say, you're much further along than I was. But part of it is remembering what it was like for me. Right. And having some come along and mentor me, but how I really always wanted to be seen, not as somebody, I want to be seen as a partner. Right. And I think that's what, we are in ministry. And one of the things that I think is said over and over is they have to feel ownership. They have to feel that they have a part in, even in decisions that are made within the church. Absolutely. In terms of ministry. Don't just give them a ministry that is a throw-off ministry. Hey, we've got nobody to do this. Why don't we get one of the teens to do it? I mean, I remember as a youth minister, they used to throw some things, the teens just saying, the teens will do it. Let's let them take care of it, Yep. But you want to give them something they're gifted to do, they're talented to do, so that they grow up feeling like they are a part of the body. Yep. That we know their hand, their arm, whatever part they might play in the body of Christ, so that they know if they ever detach from the body, if they leave the body, number one, they're going to feel it. Yep. And number two, the church is going to feel it. That's right. And so I'm afraid that many times they just feel like they're on the ride along. Yeah, that's true. That they're not really a part. Yep. And I have to, some of the things we've talked about outside of this podcast have made me examine myself and say, man, some things I've forgotten back when I was youth minister and the way I used to teach and do, and I've gotten away from some of that I need to get back to, so that the young people realize this is about you as well. We want you to see how Jesus, because you said this to me today, and it stuck with me, how that they need to know how Jesus plays out in their everyday life. Yeah. They need to know what it's like to be a follower of Christ. You said if you're playing football, or if you're in the classroom, or if you're at the movies with your friends, they need to know what literal difference Jesus makes in their life at that moment. I love that. It stuck with me. Yeah. Yep.
I think that's the thing that has been my guiding light over the past bit when I've been trying to think about how I do ministry and how I help these kids grow. Because I want faith to matter to them just as much on a Tuesday morning or Thursday afternoon as it does Sunday at 10:45 when we come together for worship. Yeah. So we're not going to solve every problem. But next week, we're going to try to do a little bit of that. So this week has been a little bit of wrestling, like, man, why is the church struggling so much? Why does it seem like we always are a step behind? But next week in our conversation, we're going to try to come to some solutions. Maybe not all of the solutions, but we're going to try to brainstorm some ways that we can actively make a difference. We can actively take a step toward inviting the next generation in and involving them in what God is doing here and in the church at large.
And by the way, I'd love to hear some thoughts of people who are watching this.
Absolutely.
Let us know.
Absolutely.
Comment on how you think the church can do a better job.
That's a really great thing. We'd love to hear from you this week. We look forward to being with you next week, both on this podcast and in all of the places that we're posting content on our YouTube channel, on our social media, especially on Instagram. Go ahead and give us a follow. It really does help us if you would click this like button on this video, subscribe to the channel. We look forward to taking another step in the journey with you. Hope you have an amazing day. Grace and peace, my friends.
God bless.